She stamped books at the circulation desk with mechanical precision, her voice barely above a whisper when reminding students about overdue fines. The kids called her Mrs. Gray behind her back, not because it was her name, but because everything about her seemed colorless. Gray cardigan, gray skirt, hair pulled back in the same boring bun every single day. Just another librarian who shushed too much and made everyone take off their headphones. But when someone left a coded threat hidden in a returned book and the FBI couldn't crack it in 3 hours, she solved it in 45 seconds. Because before Rachel Hayes stamped books in a small Georgia town, she had spent 12 years at Langley decoding communications that kept the nation's enemies awake at night. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we begin this story of hidden brilliance and impossible codes, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe the smartest people are often the most invisible, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who protect us with their minds. Meadowbrook High School sat on the outskirts of Valdosta, Georgia, a town small enough that everyone knew everyone, but large enough to have its own target. The school served about 800 students, mostly kids from farming families and the children of workers at the Moody Air Force Base 20 miles south. It was the kind of place where football games mattered more than AP test scores, where prom was a bigger deal than college acceptances, and where the library was seen as punishment rather than sanctuary. Rachel Hayes had been the head librarian for 5 years. At 39, she possessed the kind of understated beauty that people overlooked because she worked so hard to be overlooked. Blonde hair always pulled back severely, minimal makeup, glasses that were functional rather than fashionable. Her clothes came from department store clearance racks, chosen for their ability to blend into beige walls and avoid any attention whatsoever. She moved through the library with quiet efficiency, reshelving books, helping students find resources for papers they'd started the night before, and maintaining the kind of ordered silence that teenagers instinctively rebelled against. The students tolerated her. Some appreciated that she never turned anyone away, even when they came in just to avoid class. Others found her irritating, with her constant inside voices reminders and her insistence on actual research instead of just copying from Wikipedia. None of them knew anything about her except that she had appeared 5 years ago, took the job that no one else wanted, and lived alone in a small house near the edge of town. Mrs. Hayes is so boring, Madison Chen whispered to her friend Tyler during lunch period in the library. They were supposed to be working on a history project, but were mostly on their phones. Like, has she ever done anything interesting in her entire life? Doubt it, Tyler replied, not bothering to lower his voice much. Probably been stamping books since she was born. Bet she reads dictionaries for fun. Rachel heard them from the circulation desk, but showed no reaction. She had heard worse, had been called worse. None of it mattered. This was the life she had chosen, the invisibility she had earned through 5 years of deliberate insignificance. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Rachel arrived at 6:30, a full hour before school started, just like she did every day. She unlocked the library, turned on the lights, booted up the ancient computers that took forever to load, and began her routine. Check the book drop, process returns, prepare the circulation desk, make sure the study tables were clean. As she processed the overnight returns, she noticed something odd. A copy of The Catcher in the Rye had been returned, but tucked inside was a folded piece of paper. Students left things in books all the time. Notes, homework, bookmarks, occasionally something embarrassing they'd forgotten about. Rachel pulled it out, intending to throw it away. Then she saw what was on it. Not words, not exactly. A series of numbers, letters, and symbols arranged in blocks. Her hands went still, her breath caught. After 5 years of looking at nothing more complex than the Dewey Decimal System, she was staring at a cipher, a sophisticated one, not some kid's idea of a secret code. This had structure, pattern, deliberate encryption methodology, and at the bottom, in plain text, just 3 words: noon today. Boom. Rachel's mind, dormant for 5 years, activated like a computer booting up after a long shutdown. She recognized the cipher type instantly, a modified visionaire with a probable null character insertion pattern. Difficulty level, intermediate. The kind of thing that would take an amateur hours and might stump local police entirely. She should call someone, principal, police, someone in authority. That would be the normal, expected librarian thing to do. Instead, Rachel sat down at her desk, pulled out a piece of scrap paper, and began working the cipher. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from 1,000 similar puzzles. She identified the key length through frequency analysis, isolated the nulls, mapped the substitution pattern. 45 seconds later, she had it. Chemistry lab, fertilizer bomb, vengeance for humiliation. Rachel's blood went cold. She grabbed the phone and dialed the principal's office. Principal Davidson arrived within minutes, along with Coach Martin and Ms. Rodriguez, the chemistry teacher. Rachel showed them the note, explained what it said without explaining how she knew. "How did you figure this out?" Davidson asked, staring at the cipher like it was written in ancient hieroglyphics. Pattern recognition, Rachel said simply. We need to call the police. Now. Davidson called 911. Within 15 minutes, Valdosta PD had 3 officers at the school. Within 30 minutes, they had evacuated the building and called in the county bomb squad. By that point, word had spread. Parents were freaking out. Media was arriving, and what had been a quiet Tuesday morning had turned into a full crisis. Detective Marcus Webb from Valdosta PD took the note from Rachel, studied it with a frown. You decoded this? How? I'm good with puzzles, Rachel replied, keeping her voice steady and uninteresting. The pattern was pretty straightforward once you understood the structure. I don't understand anything about this structure, Webb admitted. We've got the bomb squad checking the chem lab now, but I need to know more about this code. Can you walk me through it? Rachel did, keeping her explanation simple, using terms that wouldn't raise questions about where she had learned this. Webb took notes, nodded along, clearly not fully understanding, but trusting that she knew what she was talking about. 2 hours later, the bomb squad found it. Crude but functional device hidden in a chemical storage cabinet in the chemistry lab. Fertilizer-based, timer set for noon, enough to cause serious damage and casualties. They disarmed it, and suddenly, Meadowbrook High School's boring librarian was the person who had saved the day. The local news covered it that afternoon. Librarian's quick thinking prevents tragedy, read the headline. They interviewed Rachel briefly in the parking lot, and she gave them nothing. Said she was just glad students were safe, that anyone could have figured out the pattern if they looked closely enough, that she was ready to get back to normal library operation. But the FBI had been called in because bombs at schools meant federal jurisdiction, and FBI agents were very interested in how a small-town librarian had cracked a cipher in under a minute that had taken their analysts considerably longer. Special Agent Lisa Huang arrived at the library the next morning, along with her partner, Agent Torres. Both wore the standard FBI uniform of dark suits and serious expressions. They found Rachel reshelving books in the fiction section, looking exactly like what she was supposed to be, a forgettable librarian doing forgettable work. Mrs. Hayes, Agent Huang said quietly, respecting library protocol. We need to ask you some questions about yesterday. Rachel turned, her expression neutral. Of course. Should we use the conference room? They settled into the small room where teachers occasionally held meetings. Huang pulled out the note, now in an evidence bag, and placed it on the table. Walk us through how you decoded this, Huang said. Not a request. A command disguised as one. Rachel went through the same explanation she'd given the detective, keeping it simple, educational, like she was teaching a class. Huang and Torres listened without interrupting, their faces unreadable. That's interesting, Huang said when Rachel finished, because our cryptanalysis team took 90 minutes to break that cipher. You did it in 45 seconds. I got lucky, Rachel replied. Recognized the pattern. From where? Torres asked, speaking for the first time. Where does a high school librarian learn advanced cryptography? I minored in mathematics in college, Rachel said, which was true. Took some courses in coding theory. It stayed with me. What college? Huang pressed. University of Georgia. And after college? I worked in data analysis for a few years, then moved into library science. All true, all carefully vague, all designed to be boring enough that they'd lose interest. But Huang wasn't losing interest. She pulled out a tablet, tapped a few times, studied something. Rachel Christine Hayes, born 1984, Athens, Georgia. Undergrad at UGA. Graduate work at Georgetown. Worked for a consulting firm in the DC area from 2007 to 2018. Then nothing. No employment records, no tax return, nothing for a year. Then you show up here in 2019, take this job, and disappear into perfect suburban anonymity. Rachel's face didn't change. I had some personal issues. Took time off. Decided I needed a change of pace. What consulting firm? Torres asked. Booz Allen Hamilton, Rachel replied without hesitation. Also true. Also where half of CIA's external contractors came from. Huang and Torres exchanged a glance. They knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to know that Rachel's story had holes big enough to drive a truck through. Mrs. Hayes, Huang said carefully, we're not here to cause problems for you, but we have a student who built a bomb and encrypted his threat using a cipher that most people with security clearances couldn't crack that fast. We need to know if you have background that might help us understand the sophistication level we're dealing with. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. The walls she had built over 5 years, the carefully constructed persona of insignificance, were cracking. She could lie better, could stonewall, could make them go away. But a kid had tried to blow up a school, and if there was one thing Rachel Hayes couldn't tolerate, it was wasted potential being used for destruction. I can't talk about my background, she said finally, but I can tell you that the cipher wasn't as sophisticated as you think. It's the kind of thing you'd learn in an undergraduate cryptography course, which means your bomber is either a very smart kid who taught himself, or he had help from someone who knows their way around encryption. Can you help us figure out which? Huang asked. That would depend on whether you're willing to keep certain things confidential. We can work with that. Rachel pulled the evidence bag closer, studied the cipher again with eyes that were no longer hiding what they saw. The key choice is interesting. Most amateurs use words or phrases they can remember. This one used what looks like a random string, but there's a pattern in the letter frequency that suggests it might be a phrase in another language run through a substitution. If I had to guess, I'd say whoever created this has been studying encryption for a while, but hasn't had access to professional training. Self-taught, probably from internet resources and books. Can you narrow down what resources? Torres asked. Rachel closed her eyes, thinking back to her years at Langley, to the thousands of intercepts she had analyzed, to the patterns that different groups and individuals used. There's a methodology here that feels academic rather than practical. I'd look for a student taking computer science or advanced mathematics, someone who spends time on encryption forums or hacking communities, probably socially isolated, intelligent, but frustrated by being smarter than his peers. That narrows it down to about 50 kids in this school, Huang said dryly. Look for someone who checked out books on cryptography from this library in the past 6 months, Rachel suggested. I keep records. She did. The FBI spent the next 2 hours reviewing checkout records while Rachel went back to her desk, stamping books like nothing had happened. But something had changed. The agents kept glancing at her, seeing something different now. The students who came in for study hall whispered more than usual, news of the bomb having spread through the teenage information network at light speed. By afternoon, the FBI had their suspect. Kevin Marsh, Jr., straight-A student, captain of the math team, and according to his social media history, someone who had been relentlessly bullied for being too smart and too weird. He had checked out 3 books on cryptography in the past 4 months, all from Rachel's library. They found him at home, arrested him without incident. He confessed within an hour, said he wanted to make them pay attention, make them respect him, make them understand what it felt like to be afraid. The bomb had been his magnum opus, the cipher his signature. He had expected it to be found and solved, but not this quickly. He wanted the drama, the attention, the proof of his intelligence. Rachel heard about the arrest from Principal Davidson, who came to the library looking shaken. They got him, Kevin Marsh. Did you know him? He came in here sometimes, Rachel said. Quiet kid, always polite. Checked out advanced mathematics texts that were way above grade level. Did you ever suspect? No, Rachel admitted. I saw a smart kid who loved learning. I didn't see the anger underneath. Davidson left. Rachel sat at her desk, staring at nothing. Kevin Marsh was smart, brilliant even, and he had used that brilliance to try to hurt people because he felt invisible, undervalued, dismissed. She understood that impulse more than she wanted to admit. That evening, Agent Huang returned alone. Rachel was locking up the library when the agent appeared, leaning against the doorframe with a knowing expression. I made some calls, Huang said without preamble. Very careful calls to very specific people. Want to know what I found? Rachel said nothing, just waited. Rachel Hayes worked for CIA's Cryptanalysis Center from 2007 to 2018, specialized in breaking enemy communications, particularly from non-state actors. Credited with dozens of successful decryptions that led to actionable intelligence. Received multiple commendations. Then, in 2018, there was an incident. Details are classified, but the result was a medical leave that became a resignation. You disappeared for a year, then showed up here. Rachel's hands were steady as she locked the library door. If you know all that, then you know I can't talk about it. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you that I understand. Huang's voice was gentler now. I've seen it before. People who burn out from high-stress intelligence work, they need to disappear, to be someone else for a while. You chose to be a librarian in a small town. That's not a bad choice. It's a quiet choice, Rachel said. Until yesterday, when you couldn't help but be brilliant. Huang smiled slightly. You know what gave you away? It wasn't the speed. Plenty of people get lucky with patterns. It was the confidence. You looked at that cipher like you'd seen 1,000 just like it, because you had. Rachel didn't deny it. What do you want, Agent Huang? I want to make sure you're okay, that this doesn't blow up your quiet life. Huang handed Rachel a card. But I also want you to know that if you ever want to consult, to use that brain for something more than checking out books, the door's open. We need people like you. The country needs people like you. I'm done with that life. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you just saved a school full of kids using skills that don't belong in a library. Maybe you're not done. Maybe you're just resting. Huang left. Rachel stood in the empty hallway, card in hand, thinking about Kevin Marsh and wasted brilliance and the cost of invisibility. The next day, school returned to something like normal. The students whispered about Kevin, about the bomb, about how Mrs. Hayes, the boring librarian, had somehow saved everyone. They looked at her differently now, with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Madison Chen approached the circulation desk tentatively. Mrs. Hayes, I just wanted to say thank you for yesterday. My little brother's in freshman year. He could have been. She trailed off. You're welcome, Madison, Rachel said quietly. I'm glad everyone's safe. Are you really just a librarian? Madison asked, the question every student was thinking. Rachel smiled slightly. What else would I be? Madison didn't have an answer for that. She left, and Rachel returned to her books, her stamps, her quiet routine. But something had shifted. The invisibility was gone. Students paid attention now when she spoke. Teachers asked her opinion on things beyond library matters. Principal Davidson started inviting her to administrative meetings, and every night, Rachel stared at Agent Huang's card, thinking about pattern recognition and threat assessment and all the skills that were supposed to stay buried. 3 weeks later, another coded message appeared, not at the school this time, but in a letter to the Valdosta Police Department, a ransom demand related to a kidnapping case that had gone cold 6 months earlier. Detective Webb called Rachel, desperate. I know you said you're just good at puzzles, Webb said over the phone, but we've got nothing. The FBI's working on it, but they're hours away. If there's any chance you can look at this. Rachel went to the police station, looked at the cipher for 30 seconds, and had it decoded. The message revealed the location where the kidnapper had hidden evidence. They found it. The case broke open. The family got closure. News spread, not publicly, but through the law enforcement network, the librarian in Valdosta who could crack codes. Soon, Rachel was getting quiet calls from other agencies, other cases. Nothing official. Nothing that would require her to leave her library. Just consultations, pattern analysis, the occasional cipher that had everyone else stumped. She said yes more often than no, because Kevin Marsh had taught her something important. Intelligence unused was intelligence wasted. Brilliance that hid from the world was just fear in disguise. And maybe, just maybe, being invisible wasn't the same as being at peace. 6 months after the bomb threat, Rachel sat in her library during lunch period, helping Tyler with a research paper on World War II code breaking. She found herself telling him about the Enigma machine, about Bletchley Park, about how brilliant mathematicians had changed the war by breaking unbreakable codes. That's actually really cool, Tyler admitted. I thought cryptography was just like computers and hacking and stuff. It's problem solving, Rachel explained. Pattern recognition, understanding that information wants to be hidden, but there's always a way to reveal it if you're smart enough and patient enough. Is that what you do? Tyler asked. Like for real? Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. I'm a librarian, Tyler. I help people find information. Sometimes that information is in books. Sometimes it's hidden in patterns. But yes, that's what I do. Tyler nodded slowly, seeing her differently. Everyone did now. Rachel Hayes was no longer invisible. She was the brilliant woman who had chosen to be a librarian, who had saved a school, who could see patterns no one else saw. And for the first time in 5 years, Rachel wasn't sure if she minded being seen. One afternoon, a man in his 50s entered the library, moving with quiet authority. He wore civilian clothes, but carried himself like military. He approached the circulation desk, placed a book down for checkout, and waited until Rachel looked at the title, The Code Book by Simon Singh, a classic in cryptography literature. Interesting choice, Rachel said carefully. I thought so, the man replied. I'm Robert Chen. I work for an organization that values pattern recognition and problem solving. We heard about your work with the local police. Impressive. Rachel stamped his book without responding. We don't need you to come back to DC, Chen continued quietly. We don't need you to have a security clearance or an office or any of the things you walked away from. We just need you to do what you're already doing. Look at patterns, solve problems, help when called, on your terms. I'm a librarian, Rachel said. Yes, and libraries are about information. So are we. The only difference is the type of information and who it helps. Chen picked up his book. Think about it. No pressure. But you have a gift, Mrs. Hayes. Seems a shame to limit it to overdue book fine. He left. Rachel stood at her desk, surrounded by books and silence and the knowledge that invisibility had been a choice. But so was everything that came after. That evening, Rachel went home to her small house, made tea, and sat at her kitchen table. She pulled out Agent Huang's card, Robert Chen's implied offer, and the list of cold cases Detective Webb had quietly sent her. She thought about Kevin Marsh, brilliant and angry and destructive. She thought about the students who passed through her library every day. Some of them probably just as smart, just as overlooked, just as likely to use their gifts poorly if no one showed them a better way. She thought about 12 years at Langley, the burnout, the breakdown, the desperate need to disappear and be ordinary. And she realized that maybe ordinary wasn't the goal. Maybe the goal was balance. purpose, being brilliant without being consumed, using her gifts without losing herself, teaching students about codes while quietly helping decode threats. Rachel Hayes picked up her phone and sent 3 text messages. To Agent Huang, I'll consult on federal cases, library hours only, full discretion required. To Detective Webb, send me the cold cases. I'll look at what I can. To Robert Chen, I'm listening, but I'm not leaving Georgia and I'm not giving up my library. All 3 replied within minutes. All 3 said yes. The next morning, Rachel arrived at Meadowbrook High School Library at 6:30. Just like always, she wore her gray cardigan and sensible shoes. She stamped books and shushed students and helped with research papers. She was still Mrs. Hayes, the librarian who seemed boring until you really looked at her. But in the back office, she also analyzed coded messages for the FBI. She consulted on cold cases for local police. She advised on pattern recognition for intelligence agencies she couldn't name. And she taught students like Tyler and Madison that intelligence wasn't about being the smartest person in the room. It was about using what you knew to help others. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. Sometimes the most invisible minds solve the most visible problem. And sometimes a librarian in a small Georgia town is exactly where a brilliant cryptanalyst needs to be. Not running from who she was, but finally figuring out who she could become. Have you ever met someone whose brilliance was hidden behind ordinary work? Share their story in the comments. Sometimes the smartest people choose the quietest job, not because they're afraid of attention, but because they understand that real impact doesn't require recognition. Subscribe to Secrets Never Told for more stories of hidden brilliance and quiet courage.